All right, welcome everybody. This is Keith from the Keith and Katie podcast, and welcome to the first episode of the Daily Outrage. And what I hope will be a regular or semi-regular feature on our YouTube channel, a daily little segment I'm calling, well, I just called it the Daily Outrage, but let's call it the Outrage of the Day. Before I get into this, here's a reminder that Katie and myself will be dropping a new episode of From the Bomb Shelter with Katie and Keith this Sunday. Our guest will be Michael from Above the Cut podcast, and we'll discuss how the modern fascist movement uses the old racist divide and conquer tactics that go all the way back to Jim Crow. We'll also talk about speaking truth to power and rules for the apocalypse, how to keep your head when all about you are losing theirs. We're also working on our Apocalypse Book Club, and we're also working on an occasional movie corner for those of you who are fans of the cinema. Now back to my little soapbox. I'll confess I'm shamelessly ripping off Keith Olbermann with this idea. But I mean, if you're going to steal a format, steal from the best. The plan is to have an outrage with two runner-ups. Tonight, there will only be one runner-up. The problem I have tonight is the problem that everyone with a political podcast has right now. With the first week of the Trump administration, we have what they call in the Army a target-rich environment. That means, frankly, that when your governing philosophy is to throw as much shit at the wall as you can, it becomes very hard to, one, narrow your topics down to the point where you're not talking for hours, and two, channel the most outrageous actions of this man, baby, which presents the obvious challenge. There is simply too much going on. The Weekend podcast is for deeper analysis and practical advice on surviving the next 4 years, and I do hope you'll check in with us on Sunday. This feature is designed for those times when, after I've spent a day listening to the news in my ear while I work, I have to talk to somebody before I explode. And since the only human audience I have is my wife, and since she gets enough of my tirades, well, now it's your turn. So let's get started with today's outrage runner-up. The usual crowd showed up for the annual March for Fetal Life today, the largest anti-abortion gathering in the United States. Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance bloviated in front of the frenzied crowd, indicating that the Justice Department would henceforth no longer enforce the Federal Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, or FACE Act, against anti-abortion protests. That law passed in the 1990s amid a spate of high-profile anti-abortion violence, penalizes individuals who threaten, obstruct, or injure someone who is trying to access a reproductive health clinic or who vandalize a clinic. You might remember Dr. George Tiller, the doctor who was shot dead by some Army of God member back in 2009, a man named Scott Roeder, who was sentenced to life with no parole for 50 years. Anyone want to make a bet that Roeder might get clemency from this president? I know. Don't give them any ideas. Anti-abortion activist Vance told a roaring crowd, should never have the government go after them again. So now instead they'll go after the women and the clinic workers. This will embolden every religious nut bar, unhinged sky fairy believing baby saver, and common woman-hating thug free reign to assault and, yes, probably eventually kill someone at a clinic. And the pro-lifers will cheer. The same kind of people attacking an Episcopal bishop for daring to preach the true gospel of the true gospel to the creature we elected president will consider any clinic murders blood atonement for the sins of the nation, or such as some other such bullshit. Meanwhile, members of the white nationalist group Patriot Front showed up for this March for the Fetus rally. A white supremacist and neo-fascist hate group, Patriot Front, you might remember those guys. They're emerged as a rebirth or rebrand of a neo-Nazi organization, Vanguard America, in the aftermath of the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottetown, Virginia. That's the one where a young woman died. You remember the one, the Jews will not replace us? Yeah, that one. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Patriot Front represents one of the most prominent white supremacist groups in the country. Well, folks, if you're known by the company you keep, you'll also be interested to know that standing right with these neo-Nazis were Senate Majority Leader John Toon, House Speaker Mike Johnson, and Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis. Why am I not surprised? They were all there to celebrate life. Tonight's winner, however, is the new American Gestapo, known popularly as ICE, Immigrations and Custom Enforcement. In their newfound zeal to round up migrants, children, and other undesirables, they've also decided to go after, wait for it, Native Americans. During Wednesday's tribal council meeting for the Navajo Nation, it was announced that one member of the nation was detained by ICE officers for 9 hours. There are also multiple accounts of ICE officers attempting to pick up Navajo Nation members because they do not recognize the tribal ID, or CIB, which stands for Certificate of Indian Blood. They don't recognize those papers as official forms of identification. This is all on the record, and you can read it for yourself on the official Navajo Nation Tribal Council Facebook page. It was noted at the council meeting that many members of the community struggle with obtaining proper ID. For the Navajo, there's only one place to get a tribal ID, and it presents a challenge for other tribal members to reach it from outside the reservation. What good would it do if ICE won't recognize it anyway? The thing, though, and what I want to know is why. Members of the Navajo Nation were here before we were. Where the hell are you going to deport them to? Miami Beach? I guess you have to understand the racists that run ICE and the people who give them their marching orders. It's simply a question of going after brown-skinned people, and for them, it's just too damn hard to separate Native Americans, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Jamaicans, Guatemalans, Venezuelans. Hell, they ain't white, so just grab them all and let God sort them out back wherever they came from. I mean, these are the same brave men and women of federal law enforcement who showed up at Hamline Elementary School in Chicago looking for illegal children today. Shout out to the principal at that elementary school who did not let ICE perform a raid on their school. The Chicago PD was kept in the dark about the raid. We know that was on purpose. You might ask, what the actual fuck were they going to do with elementary-aged children that they planned to detain? And don't tell me they were going after the worst of the worst. They just tried to detain children. I'll leave you with this quote tonight. Quote, "Terrible things are happening outside. Poor, helpless people are being dragged out of their homes. Families are torn apart. Men, women, and children are separated. Children come home from school to find that their parents have disappeared." Where is this quote from, you might ask? It's from the Diary of Anne Frank, January 13th, 1943. Thanks for listening, and good night.